The war begins. They thought he would be easy. The French had swept across much of West Africa. King after king had fallen before their modern guns. Army after army had broken and run, and now they set their eyes on the empire of Samori Touré, and they were sure it would be just like all the others. One more African king, one more quick, easy victory. They could not have been more wrong, because Samori was about to teach the mightiest army in the region a lesson they would never forget, and begin a war so long and so stubborn that it would still be raging almost 20 years later. To understand this war, you first have to understand why the French were even there. Far away in Europe, the powerful countries had grown greedy for Africa. They wanted its land, they wanted its gold, its ivory, its rubber, and its riches. And so they had begun to grab pieces of the continent for themselves, drawing borders on maps and claiming huge territories that were not theirs to take. And France was one of the hungriest of them all. France was pushing out from the coast, deeper and deeper into West Africa, swallowing up land as it went. French soldiers marched inland with their cannons and their modern rifles, and one by one the local kingdoms fell before them. But then the French ran into Samori's empire, and everything changed. Now, the French had a huge advantage, and they knew it. They had the best weapons in the world. They had cannons that could smash through walls. They had endless supplies of guns and bullets, shipped in from a rich and powerful nation. And they had well-trained soldiers who had already conquered many other lands. Against all of that stood Samori Touré, and most people would have expected him to be crushed in a matter of weeks. But Samori was no ordinary opponent. Remember, this was the clever trader who had built an empire from nothing. This was the brilliant general who had won 100 battles. And this was a leader who, unlike so many others, truly understood the danger of the European guns and had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of fight. So when the French came, Samori was ready. First of all, his army was not a disorganized mob. It was one of the most disciplined and well-trained fighting forces in all of Africa. His soldiers were brave, loyal, and skilled. They knew how to move, how to fight, and how to obey their commanders. Second, Samori had guns of his own. He had spent years buying and trading for modern rifles because he had always known this day might come. His men were not fighting tanks with spears. They were fighting back with real firepower. And third, and this is the most amazing part, Samori did something that almost no other African leader of his time managed to do. He learned to make and fix the guns himself. Samori set up his own workshops. He gathered clever blacksmiths and craftsmen, and he had them study the European rifles. And these African craftsmen learned to repair the guns, to make spare parts for them, and even to copy them and build new ones. So when Samori's rifles broke or ran low, he did not have to beg the Europeans for help. His own people could keep his army armed. Think about how brilliant that is. He turned his empire into a place that could make its own modern weapons. It meant that France could not simply cut off his supply of guns and starve his army. Samori could keep fighting on his own. And so, when the two forces finally met on the battlefield, the French got the shock of their lives. Samori's army did not break and run like the others. It stood and fought it fought well. Samori's warriors, with their modern rifles and their iron discipline, met the French head-on, and they held their ground. In battle after battle, they made the French pay dearly for every step forward. And Samori was not just tough, he was smart. He was a master of the art of war. He did not always meet the French in the open, where their cannons could do the most damage. He used his knowledge of the land. He struck fast, then pulled back. He chose his battles carefully. He set traps and ambushes. He kept the French guessing, never quite sure where he would appear next. The French generals were stunned. They had expected another easy little war. Instead, they found themselves in a long, hard, bloody struggle against a brilliant enemy who simply would not fall. They pushed, Samori pushed back. They attacked, Samori counterattacked. Sometimes the French won a battle, sometimes Samori won, but he was never destroyed. Year after year, he kept his empire and his army alive, and he kept the mightiest power in the region fighting for its life. And Samori was clever in other ways too, not just on the battlefield. He understood something important. He knew that France was not the only European power hungry for West Africa. The British were there too, expanding their lands nearby. And the French and the British did not fully trust each other. They were rivals. So Samori played them off against one another. He made deals, he sent messengers, he tried to use the British against the French and to buy guns and support wherever he could. He was fighting not just with soldiers, but with cunning and diplomacy, like the sharp trader he had always been. He signed treaties when it suited him. He broke them when he had to. He gave up small pieces of land to keep the peace for a while, and then used that time to rebuild his strength. He was slippery, he was patient, and he was always thinking 3 moves ahead. The French threw generals after general at him. They poured in more soldiers and more guns. They were absolutely determined to crush this stubborn African king who dared to defy the might of France. But Samori would not be crushed. And so the war dragged on. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then more. It became one of the longest wars of resistance in all of Africa's history. While other kingdoms fell in weeks and months, Samori Touré held on, year after year after year. He became famous across the whole region. To his own people and to Africans watching from far away, he became a hero, a symbol of resistance, proof that the Europeans were not unbeatable and that an African leader could stand up to them and fight them to a standstill. And to the French, he became something else. He became an obsession. He became the enemy they could not defeat, the thorn they could not pull out, the king they were determined to capture, no matter how long it took or how much it cost. But as the years passed, the pressure kept growing. Because France was a huge and powerful nation with almost endless soldiers and guns and money, and Samori, for all his brilliance, only had one empire. Every year of war cost him men he could not easily replace. Every year the French squeezed a little tighter. They took a town here, a region there. Slowly, slowly, the noose was beginning to close. Samori could win battles, he could outsmart generals, he could hold on with incredible skill and courage, but he was fighting a giant, and the giant was patient, and it was strong, and it was not going away. And Samori knew it. He knew that if he simply stood still and let the French keep grinding him down, then one day, no matter how brave he was, they would finally overwhelm him. He needed a plan, a bold plan, a desperate plan, something no one would expect. And Samori Touré, the trader, the warrior, the empire builder, was about to make one of the most incredible and shocking decisions in the entire history of African resistance. He was going to pick up his entire empire, his people, his army, everything, and march it hundreds of miles away, burning the land behind him as he goes, to build a brand new empire somewhere else. It is one of the boldest moves in all of history, and it will keep the French chasing him for years to come.